The purpose of this video is to actually give you a fast track in learning some things that are not taught by your guitar teacher, are usually not talked about in videos online. And these are all things that you would think are common sense, but unless someone explained it to you, might not be so common. So let's start with the first tip. Now, my first tip for you is actually about guitar cables. A lot of people just take them and forcibly roll up the cable and eventually end up with a cable that it's kind of kinked. It starts to have intermittent issues where the sound cuts in and out. And a lot of this has to do with how you roll up your cable. Now, you're probably thinking, I don't really need a course in how to roll up a cable. It's pretty simple. But you'd be surprised how many people don't know how to roll up a cable. I interned at a studio called Blue Wave Studios in Vancouver, but at the time when I did my internship, part of it had to do with learning how to roll up cables. And I thought it was stupid. Come on, man, I'm not paying all this money to go to college so I can learn how to roll up cables, but turns out I didn't really know how to roll up a darn cable. So I'm gonna show you what I learned. It's pretty simple, but when you don't know, you don't know. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lay this cable flat out down, and I'm going to start with holding right after the jack here. It doesn't really matter where you do it, but that's how I do it. Right after the input jack here, and I just hold it with my pinky, so my hand is kind of loose. And then when you grab the cable here, grab it between your thumb and your first finger, and what you want to do is get the length that you want, and then what you do is that you twist with your finger and thumb. And how you see how the cable moves right now? So what you want to do is roll it towards you, so you end up with a loop. And then you start over again. You grab about a foot. Now notice how the cable just swings back and forth. If I were to force it this way, notice the loop I'm getting here? I couldn't put it together. The whole thing would just unravel. So what I do is I grab a little longer than a foot, and again, I twist towards me with the thumb and first finger, and I keep going. So I'm going to do the whole cable this way. And you just roll it, and you unkink it, but not forcibly. You don't want to put any stress on the cable. And you keep rolling this way. Now, ultimately, the best scenario is where you have a Velcro tie, where you can just Velcro this, and then your cable is rolled up. If you don't have one, what you can do is use some of the excess cable and you pass it through the loop. And then what you're going to want to do is bring it back around, kind of like how we tie our shoes. So you have the excess cable, you bring it around, and without tugging too hard, you just make a gentle loop like this. It's not optimal, but it's not going to break anything. And this is just a very neat way of rolling up your cables, and you can do a bunch of them this way. But I would advise, if you intend to keep your cables for a long time, just get yourself a Velcro wrap that you can put around here, and it makes it look much neater than what I have over here. But that's the basic of it. For this next part, we are talking about long guitar cables and the effect that they have on your tone. So the very first thing you're going to notice is that, let's say, for example, you're using a 20-foot long cable going from your guitar to your pedal board, and your pedal board has multiple pedals with about 2-inch long, maybe 3-inch long patch cables in between. Add all those up, and then at the end you have a cable that's 60-foot long going to your amplifier. Add every inch of length of cable, and what you have is a reduction in the high frequencies. And the reason for that has to do with an effect called capacitance. So capacitance is the ability for the cable to pass an electrical charge. It's going to store it and release it. And what happens, because we play with what is called an unbalanced cable, that is basically the positive, the negative, and the ground, and the negative and ground share a similar signal. And what happens, a lot of the high-end information, a lot of the signal from the negative gets dumped into the ground. So we start to lose high frequency the longer the cable run. So think of it this way: more capacitance, less high end. So you're thinking, what's the solution here? I need long cables. There's actually two. You either reduce some of the length of the cable, which is not always in your favor if you play live. You probably need to be able to step around, or you need to be further from the amp. So another solution, which is probably the best solution, is either 1 or 2 buffers. So some people prefer to put a buffer first in line on their pedal board, and another one at the end of the pedal board so it can send a really nice buffered signal to the amplifier. So if you find that you're losing a lot of high end, you might want to use a buffer. At the opposite end of the spectrum, if you find that your signal is way too bright, you don't know how to tame some of that brightness, you might want to use a longer cable to reduce some of the high end. This is something that most guitar players will go through at one point in their lives. It's to show up at a gig or show up at rehearsal and you forgot one very crucial piece of gear. You forgot the speaker cable to hook up your amp head to your cab. And someone says, hey, don't worry about it, just use your guitar cable. If you do this, you run into many risks. The first one is that a guitar cable is not a speaker cable. It's made to pass a high impedance signal. If you don't know what that means, it just means a signal that is very weak. That's why our amplifiers have a preamp section to take that really weak signal, pre-amplify it before it hits the actual amplifier. Now, if you use that between the amp head and your cabinet, what you're doing is you're exposing that cable to really high signals and really strong power going through, and it wasn't designed to withstand that, as opposed to the guitar cable that is made to withstand such current. If you put a guitar cable, it might run between the amp head and the cabinet, but keep in mind that it might get really hot and damage your cable, or worse, it could actually start to damage the amplifier itself. So I strongly recommend to always use the proper cable for whatever application it is designed for. So if you have a speaker cable, use it for that. Don't use a guitar cable, because you might break the cable or you might even break the amp. Something that guitar players do all the time is mix up wattage and decibels. Those are two very different units of measure. So wattage is the power produced or consumed by a piece of gear. Decibels is the unit of measure for how loud something is. So if you say to someone, is 15 watts loud enough to play with a certain band? It could be. It doesn't mean that it's 15 watts, it equates to 15 decibels. Decibels are a completely different thing. So you have to look at the power efficiency of the speaker that you have in there. You have to look at many, many variables to find out if a 15 watt amp is loud enough for a gig. So think of it this way. It's kind of like saying, is a 60 watt bulb bright enough for my room? Well, those are two different things. How many lumens does the light bulb have? So you could put a 60 watt bulb in there. It requires 60 watt to operate, but how much light does it put out? Those are two different things. And when it comes to wattage and decibels, it's sort of the same thing. So when people say, don't get an AC10, get an AC15, it is much louder. Oh, it's got more wattage, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily louder. So if you ask for advice, be sure to ask whether it's loud enough and not necessarily if it has enough power. 15 watts should be plenty powerful, but is it loud enough? Now you show up to a gig, you have your amp and your pedal board, you install everything, you're ready to go, you turn on the amp, and you have the worst ground loop you've ever heard. You tried checking all your cables, the pedals themselves, the amp, you can't seem to find the source. Most of the time, the source is this. You have your amplifier connected to one wall outlet, then you have the rest of your rig plugged to another. Combine the two, and you get the ground from two different sources coming in through your signal. The only way to really get rid of that is not to buy new gear, it's actually to plug everything to the same wall outlet. That way, all the electronics share the same ground. So if you show up at a venue and you see an orange wall outlet, use that one. These ones are usually tied up to a system that is made to handle lighting equipment, sound reinforcement equipment. It is very high quality design circuits that will be able to handle your amp and your pedal board without any issues, and they're usually pretty low noise. This is what they use in professional establishments. You don't see them very often in little shady bars. But if you play somewhere and you see the orange wall outlet, use that one. Now we just talked about some of the grounding issues you're going to get with different venues and what to look for if you want to get really good electricity coming into your gear so that it functions properly, so the orange wall outlets. But then on your end, there's something else that you can do to minimize some of those noises. One of them is to not use daisy chain power supplies. If you've ever seen those, they're quite affordable. Some of them are fairly expensive for what they are, And basically it's just a power supply with one cord and a bunch of connectors, and you just connect everything in a daisy chain, hence the name daisy chain power supply. Now those are fine for home use, but as soon as you start to play out, you have all those different variables in the electricity that you have at the different venues, you might find that a daisy chain won't cut it. It's going to introduce a lot of noise into the signal. If you can, over time, try and save money so you can get yourself a proper power supply. You don't need to go absolute crazy and buy one of the most expensive ones. I bought a Chuck's DC5. I think the price is actually really good on those, not too expensive, and it does what it's supposed to, and it's top quality. Now, I'm not promoting that one. I have no affiliation with the company. It's just one that I use. You can use whatever one that you want, and there are plenty of videos out there that will show you some really great power supplies. All I'm saying is that if you can minimize the grounding issues on your end, a good power supply is a great place to start. If you play a high gain amp, you may get some hiss coming from the amplifier. I have a 5150 right behind the camera right there, and that one, as soon as you put too much gain into it, it starts to hiss. If you use a noise gate at the front of the amplifier, it's not going to do anything because the noise isn't coming from your guitar or your pedals. The noise is coming from within the amp circuit. So a good solution for that would be to use the same noise gate but in the effects loop of your amplifier. What that's going to do is either reduce the noise significantly depending on the type of noise gate you're using, or it might cut it out completely. So when you show up to a gig and you have to crank up your amp, you don't have this hissing sound blaring at you. You actually have something that's dead quiet, and then as soon as you strike the first note, you're going to notice that people jump out of their seat. That's what you want. So noise gate, effects loop, much better results. Now this tip is for those of you who use batteries with your pedals. I've made this mistake maybe hundreds of times at this point, and I never seem to remember the following tip I'm going to give you. So this tip is to not forget to unhook the in cable from the input of your pedals. So what I mean is that you have maybe 2-3 pedals on a pedal board, and you figure, I don't need a power supply, I'm just going to use 9-volt batteries. Now you got your patch cables going from one pedal to the next. Well, those cables going into the input of all the different pedals, they're drawing current from the pedal. So that means that technically as soon as you plug in a 1/4-inch cable into your pedal, the battery is on. So if you don't want to drain your batteries, be sure to unhook all the cables going to the input of your pedals. An extra second tip I'm going to give you is to buy some proper batteries like Duracell or Energizer, things that will last longer than your dollar shop batteries that are just about depleted. Buy some proper batteries and have some extra ones on hands, because there's nothing worse than showing up for an actual paying gig, setting everything up, and then you press on a pedal and it doesn't work. If you don't have a battery, then you got to ask your bandmates, you got to ask everybody, and then you're going to be in panic mode, and that's not a fun headspace to be in when you have a show to play. So if you play with batteries in your pedals, bring some extra ones and buy the good ones, because the cheap ones, they die on you. Now the following tip has to do with tuning stability. So you're playing with your bandmates and then you realize that your tuning seems to be off. But then you check and everything's fine, and your bass player checks and everything's fine, and so is your guitar player. But then when you play together, something is off. And this has to do with the fact that tuners are not all created equal. If we could line up a bunch of tuners together, and there are some really good videos here on YouTube showing you exactly that. You could line them up and you would be playing, and all of them would be picking up your signal, and they would all give different results. So some of them would be spot on, some would be sharp, some would be flat, and some would be almost there, just a little bit above. Which one do you believe? That's the question. If all your members in the band all have different tuners, the easiest way to counter this is for everyone to get the same tuner. A Polytune from TC Electronic, a Peterson strobe tuner, whatever you can afford. Everybody gets the same tuner. The odds are you're all going to be in tune when you play together, and that's really the purpose. What is the ultimate truth? Which one has the perfect tuning? I don't know, but I found that in different situations with bands, whether in the studio or live, using the same tuner yielded the best results.